I wait for the room to hush and it doesn't. It's just... dear friends, welcome to our last event. It's a long year, it's an intense year, and it comes to this, and there's a feeling of celebration and accomplishment which is totally earned. Sometimes I think people don't understand how hard sharing creative work is, and week after week, and giving readings that these students do, and it is hard, and so we like to foster it and further it, but we know that the effort is there. So, I'm Chris Tillman, as many of you know. I welcome everyone here. I welcome families of our readers tonight, and a few holdovers from our readers last night. Welcome. Welcome some of our alumni, some of whom will be joining us later as well. Welcome to our faculty and to our team. We are going to do, we'll have some comments. I will certainly have some remarks later. I think that of thanks to everyone, as well as some special guests. I won't tell you who they are. We have some special guests coming. We're very pleased that they're coming. And so for the moment, yes, are they here now? I don't see them. Your cell phones are all off. I'm sure of that. I'm quite sure of that. This evening now, or this part of the evening, is about the poets, the introducers. As all of you know, I think by tradition, the first-year students introduce the second-year students. This year we start with Julie and Rob. But before that, as there was last night, there is a gesture to be made. And the poets have this in mind, so I will surrender the microphone to them. A gesture will be made, and then we'll go off into the meetings.
We just wanted to say thank you so much to two people who do so much for us outside of the classroom, and that's Jeb and Barbara. And so we have two small tokens of appreciation for you. For Barbara, who provides us with a constant stream of coffee, we got your coffee plant, and it will produce fruit in 2 to 3 years. So, thank you, Barbara. And Jeb, we know you have a deep love of barbecue, so we thought it would be strange to present you with a bouquet of sausage or something, so we let you go and procure it for yourself. But thank you so much.
Hey everyone. Last October, late one afternoon, Julia Carino and I sat in the amphitheater outside of Bryan Hall, getting to know each other. We had spoken to one another during class and at dinner club, and after being bulldozed by undergrads in ultimate frisbee. But we had never really sat down to talk. Never mind that Julia had her own work, a class to prepare for, a house in the country to get home to. When I suggested we met up, she just asked where and when, said we'd grab some coffee, talk about writing, and catch up. Even by then, that early into the school year, I was enthralled by Julia's poems. I loved how rich they were, investigating family and place through storytelling, These were my obsessions too, but in Julia's hands they became sharper, complete. I loved how her poems communicated with one another, how they revealed some singular truth I felt I'd already known, though I didn't have the words. I loved how she could reflect the self through the natural world, both beautiful and brutal, and how her poems seemed to retrace their steps in search of history's influence. And here's something else I already loved about Julia's work. I loved that sometimes her poems were sprawling sequences that ran for pages. It felt appropriate somehow that these poems belonged to Julia. That a person so soft-spoken and reserved could all of a sudden write you into a world so full, galloping along, the voice fearless and unflinching, her images delivered with an acute grace and clarity. This is all to say that Julia is one of those friends I cannot help but always admire. I admire her for her work, the power of her voice, the way each one of her poems has a life of its own. I admire her for her character, for her generosity and warmth and care. Out there in the amphitheater, I experienced these traits for the first time, tendencies I now know to be Julia, plain and simple. She is an ally and a true talent, and sometimes I cannot believe I've had the opportunity to work alongside her, learn from her. I feel so fortunate to have met Julia this year, and I know she will continue to enrich this world with her poetry and her kindness, galloping along, shining. So here's Julia Kareem.
Hello. Okay. Thank you, Rob. That was beautiful. So first, I want to say thank you to my family for driving up today for our reading. It means a lot. And a special thank you also to Mark for putting up with my stubbornness when receiving your feedback on my poems. Most suggestions I end up incorporating anyway after much grumbling. And also before I begin, I've been asked to speak for my cohort about the program. And so not to go on too long about it, but to echo sentiments from the fiction writers who read yesterday and expressed their gratitude. I think I speak for all of us when I say that I'm humbled by how supportive everyone in the program has been of us, and how wonderful it feels to have been part of this community of writers, of wonderful human beings. And just thinking about how the last 2 years here in the program have gone by so quickly, and how so many writers before us have passed through the program as well. I feel that it's so incredible that the faculty and staff has gotten to know each of us so well, and not just for our work, but as human beings. So thank you, Barbara and Jeb. Thank you to the faculty, especially the poets, Greg, Rita, Lisa, Deborah, and Paul. And for me, thank you especially to Greg, my advisor, in whose office I feel I've shed so many embarrassing tears just talking about writing and life in general. I feel like I've changed so much because of this program, and for this, my choice to be present in poetry feels even more relevant than it ever has been. And for this, I and we thank you. So this first poem that I'm going to be reading is called We Named Our Dogs After Liquor. And I grew up in the Philippines, so I feel that this is a nice way to talk about that. Whiskey and scotch, bourbon and brandy, Blackie after Johnny Walker Black, a dark and snarling Doberman who growled beneath the chicken coops at night. They snapped at our legs and choked against chains, biting themselves when they couldn't reach our calves, hind legs bleeding with flies where skin burned red in the watery sun. I hated them all. We had 3 margaritas, all poodles who ran away. You can replace an animal, but not its nature, I learned as they chased me up the stairs. I smelled their salt breath and limey teeth, felt their powder white gone muck brown curls rubbing against my calves as I slammed into the door, banging my fists as grandfather, from whom I'd inherited fear, shut me out of the house when he heard barking. We kept dogs but were afraid of them, something necessary like bars in all the windows, precautionary as the deadbolts that fused us shut into our cubbyholes, lest we end up beaten and purple, hung by the ceiling fans like the neighbors down the street. You live in this country, you put up bars, you train your dogs to snarl as you laugh at their stink faces, their short, wet breathing. You learn to love their teeth when they clamp their jaws around your wrists, to love the way they bite because they start out pure and only lunge because you've taught them. Love them because they take the guesswork out of how you'd feel if you didn't have dogs. For a month, every afternoon at 3, Papa put tequila into my arms. A wet puppy, golden sunset brown, beautiful and sticky-eyed, so still that I was scared and trickled yellow down my pants. Dogs didn't behave this way. Quiet, that mute alien way she nuzzled up my arms as I trembled, breathing in her soft cheese and yeast smell, her pink paws. Later, growing braver, I flicked off the ticks and fleas from her scruff into the grass and fell in love. One afternoon, I saw Tequila penned up in the neighbor's yard, already growling as the man who took a liking to her swatted at her yapping face with newspaper. That is how they train them for the dog fights, said my uncle. Fear is a thing you can give away, I learned, like beauty, like dogs, and every other goddamn thing. This poem is called A History of Solitary Confinement. It's a section poem. 1. Decipher this, said father once to the quiet air, partition of silk panel dividing the room he thought was empty. And then the sound of barrel sheathing into holster under black void of overcoat. Behind the fabric tattooed with alphabet from a country I could not name, I held my breath. It is this moment where I am lost, as my father, whose arms reach down to lace the brown-black Oxfords, whose fingers brush the pinstripe clean of dust, whose hands replace the paneling in a bottom drawer, steps out into a weak February rain, a lump of polished steel under his coat. And there become 2 men. One, a dark-winged hieroglyph, small and fleeting blackbird in the weeds. The other, a thick and untamed animal standing guard, growling cipher unwilling to reveal its true name. They circle each other, prowling in the morning light. I sit behind the cloth, behind the unknown language, uncertain of whom to run towards, from whom to flee. I know I will never speak of this. Father, you are my confinement, my hidden gun, its dark and oily home. 2. To choose to be silent, to never speak, especially when necessary. As if in those solitary confinements I could see myself alighting at the end of history, knowing everything, denying everything, proud confidant. As if speaking betrayed allegiances, lest the animal take the favorite daughter by the throat, as if in choosing to bear the markers of my fate across my chest, I could forestall my own breaking. Shattered cup, the amber nectar seeping, the syrup blasted out, sticky honey on eggshell carpet, as if by already living with the worms, my body might be without decay. 3. Once, before I knew what a gun was, I lifted it up to call my father home, thinking it was a telephone. Both were black with round parts, both had pieces you could press, both fit into my hands with awkward weight. 4. Later in life, the beloved asks me what the word would be for the sound of his palms gliding down my back, skin on skin, rasp of flesh silkening the fine blue hairs that cover me. And I turn to him, because enough now, it's time to stop tallying the things we do in the privacy of our rooms. Here, our bodies fit around each other, consonant and key, lock like clips, link and tether, stream of words, torrent exchanged. Take the safety off. It is the sound of open, open. It is the sound of unsheath, unfold. One less mark that names me broken, one word spoken in the tongue that calls me home. poem is called Windmills. It's after Cervantes with the epigraph, that is the fall to see life as it is and not as it should be. Giants tumble in the barren fields, but as old Quixote prepares to charge, to lay waste the ruffians dervishing the horizon, he's seized with sudden regret. Why did he ever fall into this mad enterprise? They laughed when he bristled at Lothario's he swore were jousting restlessly beneath Dulcinea's balcony, her kiss curls spilling out in warning as she looked on from behind the lace mantilla. So what if she could carry her own, could throttle those two fresh boys, could throw those brown-necked cattle wranglers over one shoulder and deposit them at the garden gate? What a wench, Sancho says. Oh, what muscles and what a pair of lungs. Wide-lipped carnations rain down from her fingertips, already the mind's eye welcoming her spiraling emissaries. In Dulcinea, sweet burn of sun from climbing trees to gather fruit, strands of auburn hair loosed around her freckled décolletage, bare feet and running up the rust-rung belfry ladders to call to the men who helped harvest her father's fields. Come in and rest from the noonday sun. She climbs trees like a boy, but has also laid out loaves and bowls of soup, the ivory of her voice echoing from the turrets to call them in, that hollering itself a pureness. And for this, Quixote tilts at the skyline, gives his visor one last resounding flick, clangs shut the metal cage. Madness is a cutthroat business, and beauty above all to keep in our defense, above the many truths we hold self-evident. What more need be explained? The girl is lovely, the milk is white, and by God, those are giants tearing up the horizon. Okay, I have 4 more poems. Here are a few short ones. Bear. Last time they made love, his body reminded her of mountains in the Philippines. Summer, grass seeds between after she stripped the stalk bare. Maybe it was the smell of afternoon sun in his scalp, the taste of rice and green earth from the lunch she cooked for them. Her grandmother's pandan rice and cod baked in palm leaves, garlic and vinegar, food from an archipelago he has never seen soaking his tongue. Or was it the confidence of his long fingers that traced circles around the strawberry tattoo on her back? So easy to remember the time when she knew she was lovely. Up in the mountains, by the neighbor's magnolia, she remembers pungent sweat dripping down her sides. Here, the dampness of her shirt at the waist. He grips her skin where she arches towards him. So wonderful, she thinks, to never be afraid, to slip the straps off her shoulders, to be beautiful, to press into him fearlessly. Outside, cars slush past on wet gravel. Her fingers coax his mouth open wider so that he might help her remember every last scrap. Panting, she swears she can make out the sounds of home. Roosters ruffling their feathers in their coops, street dogs baying, blare of jeepney horns like women laughing in the night. Kindling. In the oak grove, acorns begin to rustle through red-rimmed leaves. I camp by water's edge, stare at the gray clouds resting heavy on the lake's surface, my heart hollowing out for the crunch of grass and lichen. In this emptiness, even the leaves fall. The things that I will dream of tonight have rushed to claim their posts, matches burning in their boxes, breadcrumbs and moonstones by starlight, thin wires brushing the windows of a shack like fingers that once grazed my back, the night whistling in an owl's beak. This poem's for Lisa. The idea of God at the midnight karaoke bar. Based on one of her prompts. Watered down by Riesling, I lean against the wall as a boy croons Shaggy Otis into the mic. eyes fixed on me as he sings, "Hello, my love, I heard a kiss from you." Red magic satin playing near. Boy with the bluest eyes, gaze lapis as Lucifer, spangled under the disco ball spiral. And I descend onto the dance floor as he diminishes the space between us on the oily and curling linoleum. I am close enough to touch his collar, white and gleaming, rhine-studded as Elvis, his perfectly slicked-back coiffure. I'm going to be with my baby. I am free, flying in her arms over the sea, he sings, parting the clouds of cigarette smoke gathered about our heads in a haze as he waxes psychedelic, leans in to whisper, "Is it cool?" My head spins all glory, glory, as his finger, outlined in a shower of refracted disco light, charts a line down the tip of my nose. And I think this must be what it felt like when my mother gazed out, flower printed from head to toe, at my father with his 70s hair, singing on stage with his red guitar about last trains and deserted stations, the words rebounding towards my mother, a litany calling from a place immortal, mythic as a blue sky, promise of all that could dig us out of grooves we've gotten stuck in. Everything tends to shimmer in song. At the bar, a new one starts up, a loop of Shuggy, singing Sweet Thing over and over, and the boy's gaze drifts to where a woman in cowboy boots is leaning at the bar, ass skywriting in the stale air, a pattern of sideways figure eights. And as he shimmies over to her, his steps slow and sugar, sugar, the light slowly glares up to fill the room with closing time. I pay my tab and back out the door. Walking home, I scan the sky for the trails of light the evening news promised I'd see, tales of the agitated Leonids they say rain down on us this time of year. I find only old habits. Overhead, wintry clouds of cigarette smoke pluming across a roseate smudge of dawn, blush filigreed between dead branches and a carnage of crossed wire, that elusive blue sky skating coyly out of reach. This is my last poem. It's called "A Card of Yellow Celluloid Stuck Loosely into a Book of Poems Long Forgotten" on my shelf. In the picture, my father's arm is raised. He is waving as if approaching with delight whoever it is taking the photograph. On his face, a milky smile and a mouth of crooked teeth, greeting them with something like love. We do not bare our crooked teeth that way to just anyone. And I feel my arm rising to meet this greeting, claiming a joy that isn't meant to be returned. Thank you.
Workshop, a wasp somehow found its way into the room where we prepared to discuss poems. It was battering itself against the window, and of course, no one wanted to be around when it gave up trying to escape. But before anyone could find something to smash it with, Becca trapped the wasp under a glass and walked outside to release it. While I think most people would agree the world wouldn't miss one less wasp, it is, after all, so small, and the process of capture and release riskier than just killing it. Becca's immediate impulse was to preserve. The moment embodied so much of what I admire about Becca as a person, her unabashed love for living things, and what I admire about her work. She knows so well how to handle what is delicate, what is difficult. With a Becca poem in my hands, I always feel a little clumsy, because each intricate line, word, and image exists interdependent with another, like the ecosystems her language explores. The natural world flourishes in Becca's work, and with detail after detail, she builds a biome around you as you read, sometimes in the most unexpected places, a wetland blossoming in a basement, a chimeric species of hummingbird on an unexplored island. A vivid, creative imagination meets intimate knowledge of the natural environment, and while her poems can read as an artfully written field guide, Becca writes as a poet with the knowledge of a naturalist. The landscape they explore is human. Becca knows the rules of the natural world: transformation, infestation, rebirth, and she uses them to make discoveries about hardships like grief or love. When I read poetry, I'm looking for not just exciting language and images, but also a sense that, after finishing a poem, I am better able to understand myself, better equipped to survive. This is what Becca's poetry does for me. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca Barrington. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you all for coming. Julia, it's really hard to read after you. I also just wanted to say thank you so much to my cohort. I've been really just in awe of you these past 2 years, and it's been really a privilege to work with you. A wilderness grown while we were sleeping. In your dream, you were a gull in a world flooded by gray ocean. You flew all night, but there was no one, nowhere to land. Nothing but gray and gray waves. In my dream, I was falling in a lightless cavern, my own voice echoing. Nothing can scare you, nothing, more than me, nothing, because I know, scare you. What scares you? Nothing, the most. When we awoke, our bed was surrounded by a glistening white pine forest. The sun, bright daylight, but silver as moonlight. Under our bare feet, pine straw lofted thick. We sank to our knees. How do we ever get home? So that was the first poem of my thesis, and my wonderful advisor, Deborah, pointed out, what do you do when you find yourself in the wilderness, and how do you find your way? And so I wrote a series of field guides, and the next 2 poems are two of those field guides. A field guide to invasive species. Driving away from your childhood home, cathedrals in your chest. All along the margin of the highway, purple loosestrife spreads unchecked. The car windows roll down, and in front of you is a farm trailer, 3 brown and white alpacas. Their strange, dexterous noses curling to explore the slatted vents and the wind of 50 miles an hour. There are weeks where death pulses below the skin of the earth so quietly you almost don't hear. The loosestrife seeds are carried unnoticed on the hulls of cargo ships and planted to ornament gardens. They were once tied in careful packets by colonists who planned to cultivate it and treat dysentery. It's hard to know what will stay contained, what will run rampant, spread, until in marshes, its spiking flower stalks crowd cattails out completely. Half-formed, a feeling wanders through you, like someone who comes into a room looking for something, but forgets, then keeps looking, not knowing what for. My mom is here, and my sister. And a few years ago, my parents bought a very old house, and they gutted it, and essentially rebuilt the whole thing, kind of inside the shell. She's very industrious. And so now it's really beautiful. But the only thing that they did not redo inside this kind of the shell of the house is the basement. And it's this really creepy 300-year-old basement. And when I go home, the room that I stay in, the basement door is right adjacent to the door of the room that I stay in. So I think about this basement. So this is a poem about that basement. A field guide to aftermath. No one can know when a storm will bring an oak down through the roof. No one can know the pipes will burst and the basement will flood into an underground marsh where cattails and sweet flags spread. Until one day you remember the Phillips head you need, only to find wood frogs basking below the one exposed light bulb, warming their amphibious blood. And turtles burrow deep into the New England mud because dirt was the only floor down there, packed hard over the graves of settlers who died young and in winter when the ground was too hard frozen for a spade. The snappers avoid these, their tunnels lacing intricate water-filled mazes. And the mice, who have always lived in a nest under the stairs, are learning to swim. They shake themselves like tiny dogs when they haul out onto the shelf where skunk cabbage takes root in the softening wood next to 3 rickety electric fans. You return to the house after months away, and it looks the same. Shutters open, porch stacked with wood, blue kitchen, sprawl of skylit bedrooms, the low granite wall meandering the garden. Wisteria weaving the white picket fence, blossoming monumentally. But at the heart of it, you can hear an elaborate ecosystem of loss humming. Down where the furnace sputters warmth into the gray silt and clouding water. Down where, if you slit open a pitcher plant's red-veined throat, at the base you will find, in the black insect loam, the emerald eye of a dragonfly, all that remains, glittering. Geography. 1 year after, Laconia, New Hampshire. My sister and I wander the rows of booths at the Laconia Antique Center. Sarah looks for lace napkins. I look vaguely for a butter dish. Strange how places persist. Leaning on a shopping cart down the aisle of canned vegetables, in the days after my father died, I was an alien. My skin translucent, the pearly dermis of a far-off moon. How can fluorescent lights and a whole glorious array of cereal exist in a world I was lying in bed, quiet morning, where wounds of loss open, the phone rang, in the middle of our lives. Adrift between these rows of old things, I balance a pitcher in my hand, feel its blue ceramic heft. I will bring it home, fill it with milk. 2, the North Fork in winter, Orient, New York. The warmest January in years. I sit on a porch and watch the light on water. Everything is broken, everything is whole. The harbor seal we found dead on Orient Point, still and perfect. The flounder sliced for cleaning, on the dock, an open book spread along its gutted spine. The light on water. 3, sinkhole, Burlington, Vermont. I stand at the intersection of South Willard and Main, where earlier this week the street collapsed into a pit the length of a car. An old sewer system, abandoned in the 1960s, left empty space gaping below the pavement. The asphalt veneer just a taming of surface. Heavy rain found the fissures, and now pedestrians and windbreakers sidle up to the caution tape. Violence enters the world, it seeps into the cracks, floods in the hollows. The tar chipped as delicately as spring ice on the ruts of a frozen field. And beneath, crumbled cement mixes with the tangle of roots and stones, the small reef of invertebrates. There are days your absence is a door I walk through. In my bedroom, yellow jackets are nesting between the screen and the window. Only the thin pane between me and their hornet frenzy. I press my cheek to the glass. So I have two more. This next poem is called Love Poem, and coelacanths are those dinosaur-like fish that they kind of rediscovered in the last, quarter, half century or so. You can see one preserved in a tank in the Museum of Natural History, probably other places too. Love Poem. You hold me when my body is racked with ghost-given sobs. When I wade out through the salt marsh of my mind, I find you there. Think of the coelacanths, thought gone for 60 million years, only for one to be trawled off South Africa in 1938. Its thick cosmoid scales, flecked and dented with scars, wide mineral eyes, unblinking from another time. What they couldn't yet see, a notochord pulsing its spine with bitter oil, heart chambers strung in a line. They live on the wellings of the deep currents and dwell in underwater caves. They lurk and lunge for benthic fish. 20 years ago, a related species was found off Indonesia at a fish market. A biologist photographed the specimen just before a shopper carried it home in her braided basket, only to find it's difficult to scale, the flesh waxen and acrid. The world is stranger than we know, and the heart is a fossil of itself. We go on in this living world, and evolution continues its slow hum. And we dance when we are alone, and ache comes and it goes, and we take notice or we don't. And so as an undergrad, I studied English and I studied fine art, and for a while I was working on a series of paintings of these half seahorse, half hummingbird creatures, and they lived on an island, and I was subjecting them to deforestation and environmental degradation and all these things. So this is thinking about these creatures, and it's kind of an origin story for these half hummingbird, half seahorse animals. There's no mention of hummingbirds in On the Origin of Species. Darwin missed a subspecies on an island just south of Santiago because the scheduled day his captain Fitzroy decided the finally fair weather was reason enough for an extra dram of whiskey for the men, who lounged precariously on the whaleboats and gangway. Darwin didn't drink much. He was almost continually seasick, and even then prone to migraines. Instead, he set his dainty, brass-edged field desk in the light of the upper deck and read several chapters of the Principles of Geology. Then he stretched back and watched the water, while the crew napped in the sun like mountainous cats. Partially in view, behind Darwin's stack of sewn notebooks, the unvisited island. Home to rainbowed tortoises, carapaces refracting filtered sunlight, and strange hummingbirds, whose ancestor dreamed of Pegasus and stole from their sleeping father's guard an iridescent clump of seahorse eggs to hatch. Weeks later, the nestlings emerged, beaks not yet long, and unfurled translucent alien tails. Now these tiny chimeras whir through the mangroves and cutleaf daisy. On the scorching days of August, they skim low, glint green over the water, curled fishtails glancing the surface. They yearn quietly for their return to the sea, while the tortoises bear their heavy shells, gathering slow lichens through the centuries. Thank you.
So the first conversation I had with Teresa happened through email last April. I was looking for an apartment in Charlottesville, and Teresa sent me a very detailed account of her experiences at Tarlington Square Apartments. In the potentially troublesome category, she wrote, "There is a parade outside my window. Marching band, girls in leotards, evening-gowned women in convertibles, and people sitting along the sidewalk waving." She ended the email by offering to take a video of her apartment and to narrate it from the perspective of her two dogs, Jasper and Chiquitita. After I'd read the email a few times, I remember thinking, who is this person? I need to meet her. I've since learned that Teresa is as kind and attentive in other areas of her life as she was in this email. She asks careful questions of others' poems and workshop, and she's always willing to give advice and to help you with whatever is troubling you. Her poems make me want to look at art and listen to classical music and imagine the world from her speaker's eyes. She combines the beautiful with the ordinary and openly leads her readers on whatever journey the speakers in her poems are taking. In one poem she turned in for workshop this semester, she describes a dead squirrel on a doormat. In retrospect, it's such a simple image, such a simple thing. But Teresa makes moments like that stick with you because she understands that even the morning dew on a newspaper deserves attention, that a poem hinges on the observed, on the discovered, that this is always what leaves a reader wanting more. Please help me welcome Teresa Kim.
Because we decided a little while ago that Julia would give the overall thank you, you've been spared the thank you I wrote from Jasper's voice. I forgot that happened. But still, thank you to all of my teachers, to my cohort, to even the fiction writers who are always willing to talk to me about writing, because that's all I ever want to talk about, for not making me feel like a nerd. And thank you, Rob, for that watch. So I'm going to read 3 poems, but that's sort of misleading because 2 of the poems have many parts. The first poem, I'm going to retitle it to What Lasts. And it talks about, sorry, I'm sniffling because I followed Becca. This poem is based on an experience I had in Korea where I went to this ceramics village, and the main attraction there was this really old guy who has been making all kinds of ceramics for a long time, especially this thing called a moon jar, which is this very round, white jar, like the moon. Yes, so it starts with an epigraph by an artist, not the same guy that I saw. The moon jar made in the Joseon dynasty was simple and plain like the sky. The shape of the moon jars is not as perfectly round as a full moon. Whatever the final product by the master's hand, it stays with its imperfection and is better left as it is. Excuse me. All the poetry professors have tissues in their room. Start with the ending. How you're still here, though your summer skirts lie in the corner of his Gangnam studio where you slid them off. Shirred jersey one Tuesday, seafoam slip some Friday, like an array of bangles with the woman's wrist missing. But that's not the ending. Start with your leaving. The hollow rattle of a carry-on through the subways, the muffled roar heading south by aluminum train through unpaved townships, the summer air so thick with heat and damp, that the cracked clay kicks up no dust? Or did you just mess up? Does the end begin when you arrive in the Ichon Ceramics Village, that shattering, so strident, up and down the dirt alley, you don't know where to turn? In the distance, a circle of watchers gasps. As you near, you see the women clap, their parasols unwieldily tucked, a champagne sunlight caught in the trembling canopies. Past this unshaded strip, dozens of potters sit with their wares, their displays of symmetrical vases and jars lining the avenue. But here, his breath no longer sucked dry by the mouths of the climbing kiln, the district's oldest master craftsman walks over shards that litter his lot like sun-bleached bones. He is the last of his kind, who will not loot two bold halves in the middle, but throws the whole jar from one ball of clay. Sitting at the wheel with a new mound, but no, new things constitute a beginning, and it's the end you need to remember. Does it come sooner, in front of the brick wall, pocked and streaked with white crumbs of porcelain, that moment when the old man hurls the moon jar freshly fired, scrutinized, released from its tight tongue grip? You weren't there to see this, but each apprentice did, one convinced of the master's judgment, his commitment to ideal form. The pragmatist, impressed by his master's knowledge of supply and demand, the price a surviving vessel will fetch. The materialist, who doesn't yet know how to ask, why spend your life bent over crock jars you won't keep? Or that last boy, who watches the master burn leaves for his blaze and mourns the hours he stood by oven doors. He waits again for dusk when he'll hose the brick wall. It will gleam slick and black in the evening light. The larger shards he'll collect from the studio floor to sell to foreigners who ask for the edges ground smooth or the surfaces painted like the chinoiserie they're used to. His broken English barely conveying that after firing, the surface cannot be painted, forgive me. Or were you correct before, when you left the old man at the potter's wheel? Describe his forehead, wet like his ball of clay, his right foot pedaling below an enlarged calf. You watch him bring the clay to a tower, a hand plunge and hollow out the center, his foot keeping time like the tides that fall and rise, undisturbed by tectonics or the minor tremors brimming below and passing. Say how his hands thin the walls, then work like a smoothing rain, each pulse of his palms making ripples in the spinning clay. Say how you can't stop remembering another man's fingers that once stirred storms in your nape, the small of your back, all the times your clothes seem to spill to the ground like poppy petals at summer's height. And here, should you need reprieve, imagine again the craftsman, alone now in his basement apartment, having cleared his dinner dishes with his glass of wheat beer. His last thoughts before falling asleep to the glow of a muted television. His mind allowed to drift to the news he heard as a younger man decades ago, of Goryeo dynasty ships untuned from the Shinan Sea, their sunken cargo of pale green chongja, porcelain Chinese scholars of the time called the best under heaven, its formula and attending techniques long lost. Tell me how the archaeologists to receive the deep sea cases blush at their own excitement, how they steady their hands to brush off a thin-necked base. Show me its luster, that inimitable color, the celadon light that still caught in its glaze, unchanged after 6 centuries underwater. The ending of that poem, my dad actually, I called him to ask him to read me some Korean articles about vases, and he was very frustrated by my inability to understand how the color for this particular type of vase is created. Very frustrated. About an hour later, I realized when he said, "Don't you know about rainbows?" that he was trying to explain that it's not the color of the clay, it's just the way the light hits the glaze. And had he just said that from the beginning, of course I know about rainbows. So that was a group effort. This 1. Disclaimer. No line takes less to lure a woman from her disinterest than the words, "You are beautiful." So that day, girls pressed fresh beeswax into my knuckles, bent stems of freesia into my black braids. I swear, I wanted only to be beautiful, to still each quivering hair on my neck for this man who stood below the altar's skylight and alone did not turn to look as I approached. 2. Vanishing act. His hands split open the last autumn apple. Clean severed half I took for a new kind of love. In the pansy beds, I'd find aphids, the tan filters of cigarettes I'd pluck from the damp. In the house, stemware stained with Merlot. I'd boil vinegar and hold each glass over the steam, letting the acid vapor scour each scab of wine and hard water spot. Upturned like empty cloches, somehow clear though glistening, I'd watch them threaten to fall and shatter. In them, I still heard that apple's crisp fissure, sound that first racked me brain and bone and steered me, shop-worn raft that I was, willed yar. 3. Home and hearth. It didn't even take a year. Can't that be happiness? Brushing loose the chimney's creosote, rinsing the soot in winter rivers, I called each task into my day. My days were ordered as alphabets. Nights I sat by the hearth, with pumpwood and beech bark, knotted twine clipped from sprung saplings. I'd watch my husband lay down pine that hissed over tinder. I never noticed that he didn't notice the fire starving for oxygen, smoke loading the room, gray shadows soaking the rug at the feet of the fixtures. Sipping my evening antler tincture, I felt the whole house seethe, then settle, pictured sap beating in each green log like inlaid pearls primed to burst. But when he drank, I drank, and when he danced, I followed, faltering feet transported to the last days of grandmother's hand-cranked silvertone. As a girl, I closed my eyes to whirl on her kitchen linoleum, the water-warped hallway parquet, soles of my feet still soft enough then to sense the difference. 4. First spring. The wide bed empty, I pinned my hair kept to look for him. All I ever found, spring mornings in that house, hungry dogs scanning the stairs, bedroom air cramped from his shower, a pale dry square of driveway. And nights, no curtains drawn to intercept the moon's white castings, I'd wake to a bulk, tugging the sheets and shifting on the mattress, waves rolling across the distance I wished were longer, and now admit freely, had come to tend. 5. Earthquake and drought country. Saturdays, the same two crones plow the black gravel of the farmer's market parking lot, their walkers ribboned with plastic bags, thinned the way the skin of their hands now reveals whatever it holds. In the heat, they stop for iced tea, sit in the shade of spindly trees, with farmers talk fires of field and forest, sublimation of desiccated wildflowers, the rage of starved bees. Their conversation is beyond me, who never learned to read omens and sees only glitter in the surface of the neighborhood pools she walks past. I can't tell what makes them glimmer and churn, gods of sky or gods of earth, the drought's dry winds, or the early signs of the ground stirring. And I wondered at the women's words, if such wisdom arrived with age, when one day a fruit picker came, waving his basket of figs. I recalled days later his soil-stained fingers, the way he peeled one, blushing blue to a green glow of fruit before me. For weeks, I could see the boys' eyes look up, and felt, searing, how they stared as if I must never have seen this done before. 6. Paris. Fluorescent lights flickered, jolted the room. Blue carpet roiled like water, and you strode across as if it wouldn't swallow you up. I sent loud music pulsing into my body, drowned out both your footsteps and the tremors they sent through the subfloor. I wanted so much to ignore the white wings of boats that dotted the horizon, the seagulls hovering, always 3 by 3. So I might stay moored to my patch of calm shore until, from somber corners, a breeze swelled sails I didn't know I had. I heard spiral shell echoes from ear to ear, a familiar voice rising from within and humming. Even failure then looked inviting. Skirts of water parting at the prow. I saw my hands unhitch the dock lines, and I tell you, no God, nothing possessed me but myself. And this last poem, it's called Chiaroscuro, and it's in 3 parts. The first part is about a painting by Klimt. The second part is a string quartet by Beethoven, and then the third part is just me. Part 1. Beach Trees 1, 1902. Klimt's beaches crowd the horizon. All he gives is gray and stippled post after post, nothing coming into focus, all of it obstructing the view of something whitely lit behind. The ground he's littered with the blurred gold of Ticonderoga pencil shavings, blonder models demarking a few trees from the right, perhaps implying the early morning sun, which took me years to notice. 2. String Quartet number 15, Molto Adagio, movement 3. At the onset of his deafness, Beethoven describes a low hum that's taken lodging in his ears. Over each conversation he hears it, a heavy drawer scraping open, stowed papers rustling. And when at last the floorboards above him seem to admit to a wait, apologies, he must excuse himself. I imagine him at his window, at his retreat in Heiligenstadt, his eyes on the reeds, their stems pale and bent in wind. He knows he cannot hear past the pane. Past the reeds, the stream hammers damp notes on stones, and past that, in the linden tree, the song thrush trills like a coloratura soprano, first music to call him from himself, that high reach of singing he can no longer make out. 3. Donner Lake in winter. Each morning like this, brimming with minutes, blue light of a clear dawn, the lake's surface misting. Each day on just such a morning, the mountain sprawling and moonless, to see the gray ferns of my own breath fade, to feel blessed as the rain-drenched paths lose luster. In the sun, signals flash white from the water, each time to ask some shorebird the scaled emergence of a fish. Each day, to be happy with knowledge like this, urgently sought, ceaselessly fleeting. And by night, the starscape smothered by clouds, the rain so thick the mud roads spill over, to know what it is that trembles in my hands, what skids down slopes under rumbling skies, descending what is still a moonless mountain. Thank you.
Height variance. Okay. So, Matt McFarlane's poetry embodies a space that is unique to him as a person. See, Matt is somehow both incredibly hip and timeless. His goodness is reliable. Earlier this semester, many members of our cohort graciously helped me move, which involved wrestling my couch through the narrow entryway of my former apartment, taking doors off their hinges. The next day, on his day off, no teaching or classes to attend, Matt came back in the morning to see that the closet door was back on its small, stupid track in desperate need of repair. Matt is this dedicated as a friend, a reader, and a poet. His work straddles worlds. One is that of the classical. It is not difficult to imagine Matt casting a euro into the Trevi fountain in Rome, channeling Orpheus, regarding the deep existential crises of a young philosopher. His head is filled with song. Those songs of sirens, of Homer and Rilke, and those of contemporary artists like Drake and Neutral Milk Hotel. Matt draws from across time and place, well-known myths and stories, and those smaller myths that we tell ourselves daily to survive, or that we, with little preparation, find ourselves the characters in. He obsesses over words, what meanings they've carried through centuries. But above all else, in his work, Matt gets at the heart of why poetry must be written and heard. He understands the essence of song. Hear it in the Virginia wind or on the Pacific coast. Hear it in the sounds instruments and tools make when brushed by a breeze or a palm. Hear it in the way the mouth wraps itself around what the mind and heart want to utter. His poems explore the need for knowledge and beauty, the love logic of a tender man caught in liminal spaces again and again, between the epic and the ordinary, the worlds of the mind and the heart and the ear, all one world, really. It is with great joy and honor that I introduce Matt McFarlane.
There's water up here, thank God. Oh my God, I'm the first one to use it too. Okay. Thank you, Annie. That was really nice and too nice, and thank you also for being tall, because that's helpful. The first thing I'll do is say thanks to my parents and grandmother for being here. I'm sure my parents still ask themselves how their son ended up at poetry school, and I don't have an answer, but I'm glad that they're supportive of that, I guess. And I want to thank Sarah, who's been an unofficial faculty member to me. At least half the books I've read here in the past 2 years have been because she told me to read them, and that's been really great. So I'll just get started. This first poem is called Lacuna, which means kind of a pause or a quiet space, sometimes in music. Lacuna. Noon wraps the lumber frame of our neighbor's would-be garage in gauze. Winter unlimbers me. It seeps into my work gloves, an old pair of my father's, and fills the vacancies my thinner hands leave. Churned earth rusts the snow. He and the other men talk, their vows shouldered and slung, and split with a shovel blade like bags of cement. The burden of dialogue is weightless for them. I only listen and think and hope for the mute chance to leverage a nail gun's shutter, or guide a beam down the table saw edge, let fragrant dust dust my wrists. Besides, how can I describe to them the two dark birds tearing at the woolen sky? They're like kings, I want to say. My mouth fills with gravel. When quiet flocks the yard, they call, and the men begin. So have I only begun to translate the crows. Look around you, make yourself of use. So, okay, next poem. These are, well, I tried to make these kind of in the order that they were written at UVA to show development or lack thereof. But that's not exactly how these are organized. This next poem is called A Brief and True Report of the Newfound Land of California, and the title is, there's a very old book from like the 1650s or something called A Brief and True Report of the Newfound Land of Virginia by a guy named Thomas Harriot, and he was an early settler. So there's that. Okay. A Brief and True Report of the Newfound Land of California. First, know that roses are shameless there. Their red wallets unfurl along the streets year-round. Mornings stretch among the villas and banks and parking structures in tendril fog and honeysuckle. By midday, the men begin wishing to be sculptors, and the women wake and remember staring up through their skylights at the wheeling cosmopolitan night, unable to sleep. Understand that they consider every memory holy, even these, the way one might consider the Bayou Tapestry, the crowning work of many hands, a market spilling over with vegetables made radiant in the sun. But I too have stared upward in a vertigo of loss, unable to sleep in California as a street lamp threads through the blinds and stripes the bed. Lying there, I considered the sudden ending of desire, how a wanted thing changes form once it's had, how Ariadne was left naked on one of the Cyclades with knots of bloody hair in her fists, thinking, this is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. She comes to mind even now, crawling into view like the desiccated feral squash stealing over the patio wall. One morning and then the next, and in the easy symbolism of spent yellow flowers. Lying there, I also considered the act of distinguishing among passions, namely, love of self and love of another, and whether there might be a great synthesis of the two, or whether mine is an orderless world where 100 moths circle the street lamp, where curtains collapse between acts and the audience can only stare, unsure in the red velvet of their disbelief, where I walk barefoot to the window in the house where I was raised for the blurry comfort of another street lamp, where the bridge I have raised across this divide is trussed with kudzu and roses, where pattern ceases and doubt subsides. What more could I know of that place? I have seen the 20 sundowns of Santa Monica and cannot recover from their seduction. This poem is called Malacosoma, which is the genus of the tent caterpillar, which one finds all over the trees. Malacosoma. For several weeks in summer, the crowns and branches of the apple trees wear silk, densely and withheld, like a word shouted underwater. On clear nights, it's like a Halloween. The globes of pale, huge fruit glowing above the indigo grass with dozens or hundreds of animated seeds. In the boring afternoons, a boy likes to swing into them with a stick to make the curled bodies fall from the wound, like rain from a cloud if rain were ink and solid. Because after all, there are so many tents, who will miss just these few? He is a barbarian of the field, teaching himself religion. Songbirds converge and raise a violent din. This poem is called Helen in America, and Teresa warmed up the Helen theme. Helen of Troy, Helen of Troy. Helen in America. Just like Kennedy, she had 9,000 ghosts courting in her veins. 9,000 names etched on a sterling heirloom she wore only for the camera. How could we not admire her eccentricities? Terra japonica kept in a jar and dusted over meals, her leaving one eyelet empty on each laced boot, 9,000 strands of hair in a helical braid. A prehistoric fascination, we admit. The best of all potential things rising from the river of her lips, the canals of her fingers, so obvious even in the gloss of magazines. In the court of desire, all the men are guilty. Who here has not been a thief with his eyes? And then I'll read a part of a longer poem in my manuscript called Interview, which is about a reporter who is sent to interview this really crazy, eccentric photographer. And each section starts with something that one of them says or writes. So it starts with the photographer speaking. The day's frustrations leap and disappear like dust clapped out from a doormat, he says. He clicks through the carousel and roseate color clouds the screen. A woman looking over her shoulder at a man in a suit leaving the house. The photographer gestures and says, I consider this my mythic work. Gorgeous fragments of love pass between them, and they try not to overthink their suspicious lives. A band of gold glints above the reporter's notepad. She writes, creates narrative where there is none. Surely you have been in love, he says. Is it not unlike lightning striking a tree, which for years after continues to grow but never blooms? He coughs and taps a cigarette out on his palm. And isn't it like a holy city in the unnavigable reaches of some rainforest? You can watch as the pilgrims give up trying to reach it. The wheels of their covered wagons breaking on the roots, their empty boots like islands in the mud. His lighter opens a flame in the dark. Though of course, in the end, one prefers ruined cities. Ivy strung from the towers, wildflowers like yellow fires, through cracks in the stones. Have you ever woken to find yourself in the ruins? They are always so familiar. And the last thing I'll read is the last poem in my manuscript. It's called Paradise City. When the curtain rose, it was a wall of birds. Springing vines embraced the stage, and willow limbs whipped like hair, and ivy twined with ivy along the walls. I looked at my flowering arms. I looked at the faces around me and saw fields of chrysanthemum where faces used to be. Thank you.
My pet rat caught a respiratory infection so severe he had to be euthanized. Mirabella volunteered to drive me to the vet. Putting a pet to sleep is never easy, but Mirabella was the perfect companion. She realized I am not the type that wants to be hugged or comforted. She knew I just wanted to cry and then stopped to eat a breakfast sandwich, which Mirabella paid for before I even saw the bill. Few people are so perceptive or so generous. Mirabella's poetry abounds with this firm grasp on character. She has a gift for rendering people and the complex lives around them in a few well-honed lines. The distinct voices of her speakers always hit the perfect note. These voices are neither too sympathetic nor too defiant, but instead hauntingly realistic. As a reader, it is a pleasure to encounter poems so cleanly aware of what it is like to be a person in a world of grief and love. When I read Mirabella's poetry, I don't feel I'm reading a poem. Instead, I feel like I'm looking through a window, a hint of my own reflection faint on the pane. Mirabella also has a sharp sense of the ways in which metaphor can illuminate character. Figurative language expresses grief that may otherwise be inexpressible. But there is also joy in encountering such language in Mirabella's work, joy in seeing objects and concepts in a new light, and she takes full advantage of this joy by pushing images to their furthest possible implications. I can no longer see recycling, highways, balloons, or showers in the same way. Mirabella is truly a person of the highest caliber, a close reader, a fantastic poet, and a steadfast friend. We are lucky to have her at UVA, and I only wish she were in my year so I could keep her in workshop longer. Please join me in welcoming Mirabella Mitchell.
It's tilted, okay. Difficulty mode of giving this reading just increased. Thank you, Veronica. I am available if anyone has to have a pet euthanized. I am a good taxi service. Thank you to Lisa, my advisor, and all the other faculty who have been so generous with their time and energy. Thank you to my colleagues who have been amazing in ways that I never expected or predicted or wanted. When do we know what we want? And thank you to Chris, my partner, and his mom, Betsy, for being here. It was a long drive, and they're busy people, and I'm very grateful. So I have 6 poems tonight, I think. And we will start in the depths, and we will get better as we go. In terms of outlook, not in terms of quality. You can judge that for yourself. So the first poem is called Grief as a Highway that starts in the Atlantic and ends in the Pacific. No choice but to keep moving. The engine's low-test lullaby, not the worst that could happen in this red scrape of rest. I remember no on-ramp, no green sign like a beacon to save me from rough back roads. The urn has always taken up my shotgun seat, belted in against a stop I can't imagine. I haven't seen another car, nothing but 8 lanes of gray, and bitten heaps, a few each day. How easy it would be to leave you here, by the side of this road whose end is so far off it feels like God. Arrayed with other strangers' things, items treasured but tied to the roof, beloved but not enough to stop the car. So that's as sad as it will be. It will improve. The second one is called On Adaptation. I make of my body a ship. I tell you I will take you anywhere. I tell you the ocean runs from wherever you stand, is swift and endless. How beautiful the particular body, the way the light bends as if called home, that harbor that shines in use. To lose sight of land is considered progress here. What are maps to a blue blank world? You push hard, palms against my back, and the shore falls away. You tell me the sea turtle is lighter than she looks, her broad shell a skim of bone. She moves as if she will never lose her way. Where you are going, there is no water deep enough to fear or ford. The land is not the point. I would have taken any honest thing, any bright coin beneath my tongue to trade for passage. I would have taken you anywhere. the third poem is called The Rooms of My Life Are Falling Away. I have great titles. I watch what is left of my father, his keys, a faded shirt, drift past my mother's journals, heavy with his name. They jostle each other like strangers. So many boxes, like day trip boats, float out beyond the sliding wreck. The kitchen cabinet doors, half open in slits, filling with salt water and black, blink once. I chose the tile for its look of sand, but now, grains in hand, I feel how wrong I was. I should be afraid to see the furniture afloat, the seams already torn apart, white batting mingled with sea foam. I should weep as the whole house is carried out, as even the littlest things that make up life, photos, notes, a brush clump of hair, dart from windows, swim down, out of sight. And now for something completely different. So the next three poems that I have are from a different but connected interest in hot air ballooning in the 18th and 19th centuries in Europe. Make of that what you will. So they should give you a sort of abridged arc of what the collection looks like. So we're starting with a poem called Prism. It has an epigraph from the official aeronaut of France in 1797. So that should give you an indication of what the fad, how big it was, right? He says, he's talking about how he and a lot of the aeronauts, the hot air balloonists of the time, the pioneers in the field, had been imprisoned, which is very odd. But he says, the love of liberty so natural to a prisoner gave rise to many projects to release myself from the rigorous detention, to surprise the vigilance of the sentries, force walls 10 feet thick, throw myself from the ramparts without being injured, were schemes that afforded recreation. And his name is André Jacques Garnerin, which is really fun to say. So it's called Prism. To look at one color and its dulled moods all afternoon, to stare until stones seem burned into brain, pressing their mark even in sleep, dream worlds overlaid with fissure and rift. To wake each day, mouth thick with cold soil, teeth placked in iron taste. To wait for a day as far away as death and buried as deep. A little earth seeps in after a long rain, and through this, the promise of blue. And the last two poems have the same speaker. A large part of the series is concerned with the relationship between an amateur balloonist, who is a fictionalized composite of many amateur balloonists of the time, and his long-suffering wife. Hot air ballooning, what you need to know for these is that it's incredibly dangerous. It's one of the most dangerous forms of transportation, even now, when we have things like functioning parachutes and life jackets. And when it first started, it was almost suicidal. And so there are some names. I don't recommend that you go up in a hot air balloon. So there are some names in the middle. Those names are of famous balloonists who died ballooning, and that's pretty much what you need to know for this one. So the speaker is speaking to his wife. It's called Before. A landing is a fall cushioned by desire, I return when she asks me the difference. I touch the slope of her back and feel the skin's marvel, how tightly it holds, how resistant it is to the everyday. The balloon, though it seems alive, all fire and breath, is quick to yield. No instinct guides it, no desperation or love. We have had this discussion before. She wishes I would take care, and my reply, but it is too heavy, does not make her laugh this time. I offer statistics. No more than 8 ascents and 1,000 will end in fatality. She replies with names, now empty. Bitorf, the Blanchards, Olivari, Rosier, and Romain. I remember years ago, shoving through the crowd to see Rosier give his lecture on gravity. standing between two women equally lovely, his heart feels the pull of both, but eventually, inexplicably, one's attraction is stronger than the other. He chooses without choosing. The last poem, so thank you guys for coming out and sitting here very politely and still, is the last poem of the collection. It is called The Balloonist After. People thought the balloonist had to die for the collection to end, but he does not. He lives, in a sense. So The Balloonist After. My sleep has, no doubt, improved. I do not miss the way I pried her hands from my shoulder each night to stand and sneak, feet barely skimming the boards to the window. Behind me, she slept fiercely, twisting the sheets into ropes around her legs. Before me, stars like air holes drilled through hard rock, the unquiet city an exponential echo. I found it difficult to wait. Each morning, wind permitting, I floated a little farther away, the air a little colder, a little cleaner, the land below limned in blue. Now, my nights are the trail ropes that keep my days long, blank lines, and my dawns touch down gently when she wakes up, her body waiting the bed. I live a life impossible to crash, and I am happy. But sometimes, on my walk home from work in the half-light, I trip up on the curb and feel briefly weightless, as if I might keep going. And I am happy in a different way. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those beautiful, beautiful poems. And thank you, fiction writers, last night for such wonderful sentences, such wonderful work. You should know how eagerly and carefully we follow your progress from here on, how beautiful that email that comes at the moment of a particular publication, the first book, placement that you looked for so long, and how for us, that makes us remember that feeling of joy that we felt some years ago. And it really brings it all fresh, and it makes us understand what we're doing here. So, thank you again. There's a reason that tissues will always be found in two places: psychiatrist's offices, and anywhere poetry is read. Beautiful poems. So, join us now across the street. Our formal reception starts at 7, but lest anyone be felt sort of unserved and parched, Jeb has already staged some little refreshment outside in the garden of the Colonnade Club. So wind your way over, take a little stroll if you like, but we'll be gathering at 7. So thanks again to our 10 wonderful students.